Okay, Erev Tov, everybody. I think we can get started. Welcome to our Thursday night Parsha Shir, and it's a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Aviad Tabory, first of all, who's living in Israel, but is smart enough to coordinate his speaking on the Parsha when he's in North America. He's staying around the corner from us. So it's really a pleasure. I want to thank the Pekasis for hosting him, the Shir tonight, and I'll introduce Rabbi Tabory by saying, I don't know if you remember this, Rabbi Aviad. On March the 19th, 2020, Rabbi Tabory gave the first of our 1,300, now close to 1,300 shiur on Zoom. I think Ontario went into lockdown March 13th, if I remember correctly. That was our last day of school was on Thursday the 12th. The 13th, we came into school to get instructions how we're going to Zoom. And then by that Thursday, we were up and running. And Rabbi Tabory gave the first shiur on the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim. How do you do Bikur Cholim in a time of, of COVID? I presume you remember the shiur. So that's really, here we are close to 1,300 shiurim later. And Rabbi Tabory, he has spoken in between a little bit. It's not, we haven't waited 1,300 shiurim, but it's really a pleasure to welcome him back. And as he knows, and I always like to say, I remember him as when he was very, very little, because he lived in Toronto. His father, his late father, was our Rosh Yeshiva, my Rosh Yeshiva in Or Chaim in Toronto. Then spent many years as a Rebbe in Yeshivat Har Etzion and taught at Midreshet Moriah, many other places. Was the founding rabbi, I think the first rabbi to come to Kol HaMitzion in Cleveland, right, Rav Aviad? And Rav Tabory, Rav Aviad Tabory is following in his father's footsteps. He is a full-time Rebbe at Yeshivat Eretz HaTzvi in Yerushalayim. He is a graduate of Herzog College, and he also serves as the camp rabbi for a month in Camp Stone, where he knows many of our kids, I think all our kids. And he's
and don't forget that we're mishpacha. Don't forget that we're mishpacha, Jay.
I'm sorry?
Don't forget that we're mishpacha too. We're related.
How are we related? Now I forget.
Your wife's aunt Ilana.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, we're not directly related. Yes. Okay, we don't have to get into the. Yes, we are indirectly related. We have common mishpacha, so that's very good. Anyways, it's a very long introduction, but after that, so with that, Rav Tabory, Vakasha, it's all yours.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be in the neighborhood. I feel a bit closer, even though in Zoom it doesn't make much of a difference. It still psychologically makes a difference to me that I'm around the corner here in Toronto. Giving this shiur tonight, and I would like to share with you an idea which is very much, most of the shiur tonight is based upon an article of Rabbi Yoel Ben-Nun, who's my neighbor in Alon Shvut, and it's an article that I feel is not just a nice idea or a clever drasha on Sefer Bereshit, but rather I think it serves as some major classical idea, which I think is really important nowadays more than ever, especially in Israel. I before I begin this shiur, I want to make it very clear, I don't talk politics in shiurim. I'm not referring to any specific politics. If someone connects what I'm saying to politics in Israel, they're doing it on their own. I am doing it in the context of the state of Israel and of what's going on, but not anything direct to anyone specific. So I'm just making that very clear. I want to start with a very simple question on this week's Parshat Toldot, a question that is asked by so many of us when we read this Parsha, and that is, what is going through the mind of Yitzchak when he decides to choose Esav over Yaakov? That seems to be the main question that we are still puzzled by as we read the story so many times. That is the major question. But I want to ask a side question, which is also very troubling, which is at the point where Yitzchak meets Yaakov, who is dressed up as Esav, wearing some kind of fur on his arms and trying to imitate and dress up to his brother, at which point Yitzchak realizes that he's given the blessing to the wrong person. He really realizes it after Esav starts yelling at him and comes in. But at that point, when the Torah says that Yitzchak realizes his mistake, Yitzchak says, it says in the Torah, Vayechrad Yitzchak charada gedola ad meod. Yitzchak has terrible fear, and he realizes he made a terrible mistake. Vayomer mi eifo, what's outside? Who was the one who came before? What's going on here? And he suddenly realizes that he was tricked. At that point, you were to expect Yitzchak to get very angry at his son Yaakov, because if Yitzchak rationally made a decision that he wants to bless Esav and not Yaakov, so surely when he finds out that Yaakov cheated him, he should be upset at Yaakov, perhaps even curse him, right? We know that the Avot, when they get angry at their children, they know how to say it in a way that is very clear that they're not happy with their children. And this is not the time about Yaakov and his children. But at that point, the Torah says, Gam Baruch Yeh. He is also blessed, which doesn't seem so natural after Yaakov cheats his father. It would be expected, maybe, I don't know if maybe to curse him, but not necessarily to accept Yaakov with the idea of Gam Baruch Yeh. So that's my second question. And my first question, as I said, is really what is going on here in this week's Parsha? What is Yitzchak really doing? So in order to answer this question, we're going to have to go back to last week's Parsha to understand a little bit about the characteristics of Yitzchak. I'm going to put up the sheet now here and share a sheet. Just 1 second. 1 second. Excuse me. It'll take me 1 second. Do this. Here we go. Here it is. Okay. Okay. If you see on the top of the sheet, there is a famous midrash that I'm going to work with. The Gemara tells us in this midrash that each of our fathers is somehow associated with a special location. As you can see, the midrash says like this, and if you want to follow, I'm moving the mouse over the words. Avraham, says the midrash, is called a mountain. Shne'emar, as it says, Asher Ya'amer Hayom Behar Hashem Yira'eh. Somehow, Avram, his characteristics, his personality, his life story is connected to the mountain of Har Moriah, Akedat Yitzchak. That's not our topic today. Let's skip a second to Yaakov. Yaakov is called a house. Yaakov Kiro Bayit, Shne'emar Vayikra et Shem HaMakom Ahu Beit El, says the Midrash. Yaakov is somehow associated with a house, Beit El, and that makes sense because Yaakov builds the house of Israel. However, Yitzchak, says the Midrash, is associated with the field. As it says, Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh. The Midrash picks up that Yitzchak is connected to the field. He is a man of the field. And the Midrash brings the pasuk that we are familiar with, describing Yitzchak in the field as he is about to meet Rivka. It tells us that he's going out to discuss something, have a sicha, have a discussion, or have a talk in the field. And Chazal learned that he's praying. Where is he praying? He's praying in the field. That's not enough for us to conclude that Yitzchak is a man of the field. We can see that, for example, Yitzchak's livelihood is connected to the field. This week's parsha, we're going to read, Vayizra Yitzchak ba'aretz ahi, vayimtza b'shanai me'ah she'arim vayivarcheu Hashem. I always find it funny that the famous name of a neighbor in Yerushalayim, Mea She'arim, that I'm sure people are familiar with, is mentioned in the pasuk here regarding working in the fields and raising crops. Mea She'arim today, as you know, is not exactly a place where there are factories and fields. But anyway, Yitzchak is associated here with the field in his livelihood. Why? Because unlike Avram, who was a shepherd and probably a businessman too, Yaakov was also a shepherd. Yitzchak, however, was a farmer. And this is very clear from what happens in Yitzchak's life, that the threats that he has to live with as a farmer are far more serious than what Avram and Yaakov have to go through. Because when you're a farmer and you try to grow produce on your land, you are going to immediately you're going to attract your neighbors who see this as some kind of taking over the land. And that is why in this week's Parsha, it is very, very clear that Yitzchak has a lot of fights and arguments with his neighbors in Israel at the time. And as we know, as we read in the Psukim, they start shutting down his wells and the wells of Avram. There's a lot of tension going on here over the land of Israel in the days of Yitzchak. Not only that, but notice that the Plishtim at the time were shutting down the wells of the father of Yitzchak, Avram, meaning it could very well be that at the time of Avram, they didn't have the audacity, the chutzpah, to shut down Avram's wells. But when Avram dies, Yitzchak apparently does not have the same status as Avram does. They're not afraid, perhaps, of Avram like they were of Yitzchak, and they start challenging him by shutting down his wells. That is probably a direct result to Yitzchak being a farmer rather than being a shepherd. A shepherd just, his flocks walk over the land, but a farmer is making a statement. This is my land, this is where I am. So it could very well be that Yitzchak, being a man of a field, is much more aware of the dangers that are in him. And he's aware that if he wishes to fulfill the bracha that Avram was given of living in the land of Israel, is going to be very hard. Let's remember another thing. Avram was promised the land of Israel. Avram was promised children. And yet, last week's parasha, we see that the Torah goes into great detail to tell us how difficult it is, to acquire land in Israel. And we also see how hard it is to raise children and to have a family. Two brachot that you would think that Avram got on a silver plate suddenly become very, very difficult. Avram is trying last week's parsha to buy not even a huge field. He's just trying to buy a cemetery. And yet we see how difficult it is for Avram to acquire that piece of land. He has so many. Yes, I agree. Thank you for whoever said that. Avram was more of a fighter than Yitzchak. No question about it. Thank you for that. And so Avram, people were afraid more of Avram. But Yitzchak, obviously, they are not afraid of Yitzchak. I'll say more than that. The word field comes up in the context of Vayitze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh, but there's another field that I just mentioned. Me'arat HaMachpelah is a field. Asadeh, remember, it's also the sadeh, the field in which Sarah is buried. Could it be that Avram, the word sadeh in the world of Yitzchak, takes us back to the sadeh of Avram, and Yitzchak realizes that to acquire a field is very difficult, as I saw it with my own father, who tried to acquire a field, and yet it was so difficult. Every time he wanted, the negotiations were so difficult until he actually acquired that little piece of land. How much more is it going to be difficult to try to create some kind of nation, some kind of normalcy here in Israel? So if that's really true, this would make sense why Yitzchak is looking towards Esav. Esav, as we know, and the Psukim mention it very, very clearly, also has similar connections to the field. As it says, Vayigdalu hane'arim, you can see in the sheet in front of you, Vayi Esav ish yodea tzad, ish sadeh. Here, there's not even the Torah says it very, very clearly that Esav is also a man of the field. Later on, we see that not only Yitzchak lives in the field, Yitzchak comes from the field Ayef. Interesting comparison, right? Yitzchak, we know, works in the field, but he also prays in the field, while Esav, who is a man of the field, however, comes from the field tired, right? Maybe there's some kind of contrast here between father and son that this reminds me of a famous joke of it's a very deep joke actually that I like to say about this Hasidic Rebbe who passes away and his son becomes a new Rebbe. So he becomes a Rebbe, and every morning before davening, this new Hasidic Rebbe takes a bit of vodka before davening. He takes a kosit, a little bit of vodka before davening. So the Gabayim go wild. They say, what kind of Rebbe is this that drinks vodka before davening? So they go to him, they say, Rebbe, what are you doing? Who drinks vodka before davening so early in the morning? And he says, you're complaining against me. What do you want? My father did the same thing every morning. I witnessed it. He also took a swig of vodka before davening. And you didn't complain about that. Why are you complaining to me? And the Gabayim said, you don't realize. Your father woke up every morning at 4 a.m. in the bitter cold of Lithuania. And because he wanted to go to the mikveh before davening and there was no mikveh, he had to go down to the river with an axe. He made a hole in the river and he went into the freezing water in this lake. He came out shivering, almost like I was in Montreal today, really cold. His mouth was blue and he was freezing. So he took a little bit of vodka to get warm. And that's when you woke up. It's a very, very deep story about how many times we take what we want, right? This kid, he takes the vodka, not the step before. It reminds me of this because the Torah here tells us Yitzchak is a man of the field. He works in the field, but it also reminds us that he prays in the field. Yitzchak sees a connection between his connection to God and his livelihood are all connected in the field, while Esav, as if, only takes the livelihood from the field, but not more. Nothing else. That's where it stopped. And it could very well be that Yaakov, he smells, he sees Esav as a man of the field, but he doesn't necessarily understand that it's only the field and not more than that. Let me share with you how Rabbi Soloveitchik gave a famous drasha about this idea in his way. As you know, Rabbi Soloveitchik gave these drushas many years ago when he was to explain why he decided to turn his back on his community, the Haredi community, and become part of what we know as the Mizrahi movement. The Mizrahi movement in North America was a Zionist movement that made Rav Soloveitchik its president, and Rav Soloveitchik had to explain to many people why he chose to move to the Mizrahi. So in these famous drashas that he gave, a book came out in Yiddish originally, then translated to Hebrew and to English. It's called The Rav Speaks Today. You can see in this paragraph that I took how Rav Soloveitchik used this idea of the field to kind of symbolize his modern Orthodox, his religious Zionist philosophy, which is that the livelihood and your life in the big world, in the field as if, should be part of your relationship to God and how it all has to come together. And he uses this idea to explain his ideology of not separating the modern world from the world of Torah. Look how he says it here very nicely. He says, my son, learn how to go to the field Do not allow Esav to rule over all. Learn to hold Hagmara, to say the afternoon service, to observe Shabbat and Kashrut and educate the children, to Torah not only in the warm tents of Shem and Ever, but also in the field in Haran. Meaning, Rabbi Soloveitchik used this idea of the field of Yitzchak that becomes a symbol of how Torah does not just stay in the tent of Shem and Ever, in the Bet Midrash, as if to say, but rather in the entire world, and how Yitzchak did not like the idea that Yaakov was an Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim. Why? Because Yaakov is in a tent, and a tent by default is a closed area. Here is a very famous dilemma that we have many times in our lives, right? How much should we be exposed to the world that we live in? How wide should our, should our connection to the wide world go? Yitzchak believes in living the world of Torah. He believes in religion being celebrated in the field, in the outside world. While Yaakov, he sees, may be a big Talmid Chacham, as if, right? I'm just obviously using a drush here, maybe being a rabbi, being a frum Jew, but he's doing it in a tent. And Yitzchak doesn't like that for him. But it's more than that. According to what we're saying, it could very well be that Yitzchak reaches a point which he realizes that he has to make a decision who is going to continue his heritage. Now, it could very well be that at this point, Yitzchak thinks that both of his children are going to continue his heritage. At this point, there seems to be no reason in Yitzchak's mind that Yaakov and Esav cannot rule the new Jewish family together. We will see that throughout the book of Bereshit, there is an ongoing tension between brothers from Cain and Hevel all the way to Ephraim and Menashe throughout the whole Chumash, because sometimes the brothers feel that it's either or, right? This town is not big enough for both of us, as it is in the case perhaps of Yitzchak and Ishmael. Later on, Yosef and his brothers, there still is room for both of them. The question is who is going to lead. Here, it could very well be that Yitzchak really believes that both brothers will lead the family, but Yitzchak realizes, as I said before, I need a man of the field to lead. I need someone, if we want to take God's blessing of the land of Israel, if we want to take God's blessing of creating a nation, a people here in Israel, we need to stand up to our enemies. We need to fight back. We need to acquire our land. And the types of Yaakovs, of Ish Tam. What does Tam mean? Tam can mean so many things. But for right now, I think we can probably agree that Tam means is associated with some kind of acceptance of others, mean winning their way and not necessarily fighting back. Esav fights back. No one plays around with the ace of this world. So Yitzchak thinks to himself, okay, they'll both get brachot, but Esav will lead. However, we, the readers of this week's parsha, know that that's not the case. Because we know something that Yitzchak doesn't. We know what God tells Rivka. And what does God tell Rivka? Shnei goyim bevitnech ushnei leumim mime'aich yiparedu. Rivka is told they're not going to be together. They're going to separate, like Avram and Lot, like Yitzchak and Ishmael. They are not going to be together, these two brothers. Perhaps there's a lack of communication between Yitzchak and Rivka. Yitzchak thinks they're both going to be there. Rivka knows the truth. Rivka knows she has to decide one, and she chooses Yaakov. But let's go back a second to Yitzchak. Let's agree that Yitzchak, perhaps from his own experiences, realizes that he needs an Esav in his world, but he's probably not that naive to think that Esav is perfect. He realizes that there is a big danger of having the Esav lead the people. And yet, he decides to do it. Now my question is, okay, perhaps it's dangerous, but why is it really that Esav cannot be part of the Jewish community? And the answer, I think, is a very important answer, because Esav is a murderer. Chazal talk about his tendency to murder, but we read it in the Pshat. At the end of the Parsha, we hear explicitly how Esav wants to kill his own twin brother. There is no room for murders in the Jewish community. There's no room for a person who's going to lead by violence, by blood, by murder. He's rejected. He cannot lead. He cannot be the one who is leading the people. Perhaps Yitzchak does not see that. Let's now go into the Parsha and let us understand what happens at the point which I mentioned before, where Yitzchak realizes what's going on. Yaakov walks in after his mother told him to. He dresses up as Esav by putting some fur on his arms, and he walks in and tells Yitzchak, I'm Esav. Yitzchak gives him the bracha. Esav comes in afterwards, and at that point, Yitzchak realizes. What does Yitzchak realize? Why does he still give him the bracha? What we're suggesting right now is a beautiful idea of Rabbi Aviad Tabory, and I really think it is such an important idea. I said before that Yitzchak wasn't 100% sure that this is the best thing to go with Esav. He had his concerns. He didn't like this idea of choosing Esav. But on the other hand, he said, I have no alternative. Yaakov is not the man. But who actually walked in to receive the bracha? It wasn't Esav, but we want to claim that it wasn't Yaakov either. It was a third person. It was a third type of person. If until now we had very extreme people, Esav on one hand and Yaakov on the other, now we have a third character, and described by the Chumash as a person who has the voice of Yaakov, but the hands of Esav. Hakol kol Yaakov v'yadayim de Esav. This is something that we have not yet met. This is a character that's new on the stage. At this point, Yitzchak realizes, aha, this is what I'm looking for. The Ramban, and you can look at, you have it on the sheet in front of you. The Ramban explains why at this point does Yitzchak decide to give Yaakov the blessing. He asks the question here, and then he says, Hanachon be'enai. He says like this, Gam baruch yeh al korchi, against my will, she'ef shal lehavir habracha. I cannot take away the bracha, says Yitzchak. I have to give him the bracha. Why? Ki me'az shebirach oto. From the moment he gave the bracha to Yaakov, yada beroach hakodesh shechala birkato alav. You hear that? At that moment, says the Ramban, Yaakov has a ruach hakodesh. He realizes this is the chosen son. This is the chosen model. It's more than just from the outside. Yitzchak realizes this is what I've been looking for. Gam baruch yeh. This is what I was yearning for. I need someone to maybe have the hands of Esav, but to have the morality, the ethics of Yaakov. I don't want either or. I don't want either someone who can't fight or someone who can only fight. I need a new type of person that brings back together these two qualities. Now, if that's true, I think we can explain a lot of things that are going to happen in Chumash. And I'll explain what I mean. What happens after the bracha is given that Esav wants to kill Yaakov? The question is, why is Yaakov running away? Why doesn't he stand and fight? We just spoke about a new character, a person who has the hands of Esav. Surely he should fight back. We read about Yaakov running away. Then he comes to Haran, and his father-in-law tricks him and cheats him. And again, what happens? He turns the other cheek. He doesn't fight back. Yaakov may have tricked Yitzchak for a few moments, but he hasn't tricked us at all. Yaakov has stayed the same Ishtam. And then we get to Parshat Vayishlach. Esav comes at him with 400 men, and again, he bows down 7 times. What's going on here? The answer is Yaakov doesn't really change until then. Yaakov may have dressed up for a few minutes as Esav, but he hasn't changed his personality. Let's go on. Chazal tell us that when he meets Esav, he prepares himself for 3 things for the meeting of Esav. L'doron, tefillah u'milchama. Doron means a present, or in today's word, we would call it
You froze. You froze.
What did he say? He said Jacob has morality. What did Esav have?
The strength,
Oh, strength. Thank you. Thank you. I missed it.
Does he know that he's frozen?
Okay.
He probably does by now.
I'm back now. Sorry.
Oh, good.
Okay. I'm sorry. So I don't know where I stopped, but let's go back a second to Yaakov. At this point, I said, keeps his personality as an Ish Tam Yoshevo Alim. Yaakov is still running away. The Ramban says Yaakov is escaping from Esav. He's not trying to fight him. Why not? Why isn't he trying to fight him? Because he's still the same Yaakov Ish Tam. He's afraid of Esav. Chazal, by the way, they criticize him very, very much. When Chazal tell us that when he bows down to Esav, he's giving his honor up, and the Jewish people are going to suffer for this for many years afterwards. Chazal do not see this in a good light, in that Yaakov is bowing down to Esav and giving up as if from himself to Esav. But then what happens? Listen carefully. As Yaakov is running away at Ma'avar Yabok, at the passage of Yabok River, at that moment, Yaakov is forced to face the angel. And for the first time in his life, he fights. And what happens at that moment? At that moment when he fights the angel and wins, God appears to him and says, your name is not Yaakov anymore. The character that walked into the tent as Yaakov, the Yaakov Ish Tam Yoshevo Alim, he's no more. We have a new person here, a new character. It is now Yisrael. It is a person who tried to become Hakol Kol Yaakov Yadayim Midei Esav, but now actually lives up to this new character. He brings together both ideologies together in one. He fights, but he remains with the voice of Yaakov. And that's why Am Yisrael are called Am Yisrael, because now this is going to be the model that Kadosh Baruch Hu wishes to have to starve the Jewish people. I'm going to use this, and Rabbi Yoel does also. Obviously, I told you based upon a lot of Rabbi Yoel's idea here to explain a story that comes up later on in Tanakh. In the story of Shechem, Yaakov and his sons, much later in the Chumash, get to the city of Shechem, in which the mayor of the city's, the mayor's son, rapes Dinah, Yaakov's daughter. Now we know that the brothers trick the people of Shechem into circumcising all the males, using it as an excuse for them to weaken the Shechem, the people of Shechem, and they go into the city of Shechem. They massacre the entire city of Shechem. They save Dinah, and they come out and bring her back home. At which point, Yaakov is very upset. And the truth is, the Torah is not very clear to who was really right in this story. But the question really is, why is Yaakov so upset? Does Yaakov really want, he's okay with Dinah, his daughter, being kept by murderers and rapists? He's really okay by not rescuing her? I mean, what was Yaakov thinking? The Mefarshim have a machloket about this. Ramban and Rambam. I'm not going to, it's not my topic right now. But the Mefarshim really discuss whether or not it was correct or not to do what they did. The Ramban, however, has a beautiful insight, which exactly connects to what we're saying today. Yaakov is not a pacifist. Yaakov stands for justice, and I can just imagine how more so when he has his daughter being held in a city by a rapist. Yaakov is okay with tricking the people of Shechem in order to create some kind of trickery for a commando. You know, in our days, we would say a commando rescue of the hostage. He's okay with that. And if in the process, the hijackers and the robbers, the rapists are going to be killed, he's okay with that too. But don't forget, Yaakov says as if my hands okay. I've learned that they can become the hands of Esav, but I still have the voice of Yaakov. There is no justification to kill the entire city of Shechem. Force has to be used sometimes, but we have to know our limits and when we don't use force. We don't celebrate in our force. We don't celebrate in violence. We use it when needed, and when we don't need it, at that moment we stop. Shimon Levi use the force when they don't have to. They killed the entire city, says the Ramban, while they could have just killed the people themselves that were involved. They could have rescued Dinah without killing all the bystanders. And for that, Yaakov is upset, because Yaakov doesn't want to become an Esav. He doesn't want to become a person who uses violence to solve everything and just automatically lose control. He wants to minimize it and use it when it's correct. And I think that image of Yaakov that we begin to see in this week's Parsha and only develops his real ideology later on when he meets the Sar of Esav, will be educating his children to this idea. In Chumash, we will see acts of violence. And sometimes, unfortunately, violence is needed. But when violence becomes a trend, a part of your personality or character, when people use violence when it's not needed, that is the image of Esav, where we meet this week's Parsha, and very clearly the Torah says there is no place for Esav in the Jewish community. A person who just uses violence and can't control it, doesn't know how to use it, cannot be in the Jewish community. Now, I'll tell you something very interesting. That is a very famous idea of Rabbi Yoel Ben Nun. I think it's a beautiful idea. I think it's more than ever practical and relevant. The past 100 years, it makes us think about all the times that unfortunately we have to use force in Israel, how much we have to be careful in the state of Israel to use force only when needed. I want to explain to you why. I'm not going to go to any specific cases because I really, like I said before, I'm very careful how one can use this idea, but I think that it's safe enough to use this in the following. I went to a Hesder yeshiva, which means that I went to a yeshiva where we learned for 2.5 years, and we also went 3.5 years, and we went to the army for 1.5 years. The Hesder yeshiva, for those who don't know, is a type of a model of institution where the army and the yeshiva world came together and agreed that the boys would serve 5 years learning and serving in the Israeli army. I'm very pleased to say that my son has chosen this path right now. He's currently right now in the Israeli army, and he's also part of the Hesder movement. But my Abba, alav shalom, who, as some of you know, he used to be the Rosh Yeshiva here in Or Chaim in Toronto, down the road, literally across the street from where I'm staying right now. He was a Rebbe for many years in a Hesder yeshiva, and he really believed in this ideology. He told me, my father told me many years ago, that one day there was a group of French, from the French government, they heard about this idea. They heard about this institution in Israel that somehow has soldiers that serve in the army and then for 2-3 years learn Torah. They wanted to see this, and they had some kind of commission that came to the Yeshivat Har Etzion in Gush at the time. My father told me that these guys walk into the Bet Midrash, they see these guys learning, and they're introduced. Oh, this is Moshe. You see Moshe, he's a tank driver. Oh, very nice. What are you doing now? He shows them like a chumash or whatever he's learning. Very nice. They go to the next guy. Oh, this is David. David is an officer in the paratroopers. And what are you learning? Some philosophical text. Very nice. They finish the tour. They go out. They turn to the rabbis and they say, okay, where are you actually hiding the soldiers that you told us about? They said, you just spoke to them. They said, no. Those are not soldiers. Those are students. Those are philosophers. Those are academics. They're not soldiers. We know what French soldiers look like. We know what soldiers look like. Those are not soldiers. Soldiers are people who, the whole being is about violence and about, tough. And these guys, they're not soldiers. And I use this because I really believe that this model of Hayadai Midei Esav Hakol Kol Yaakov is a model that we strive, I believe, to have in nowadays Israel. And I'll explain. You know that it's an ongoing argument in Israel for many, many years, whether or not people that learn Torah should be exempt from serving in the Israeli army. And this has been going on for many, many years, while there are thousands of guys that learn and don't go to the army, and there are those who serve in the army and learn at the same time. And much has been discussed, much has been said, why a person should not be exempt from serving in the army, even if they learn Torah. And many moral and ethical arguments have been made that it cannot be that a person who is religious and learns Torah just doesn't make sense that he would be exempt from serving and taking care of the people, protecting other people that are putting their life in danger for him to learn Torah. So many sources and arguments have been made, and people quoted the Rambam and Gemaras about it. I want to quote today's shir. I think that today's shir is one of the best arguments why the first people in Israel that should serve in the Israeli army are yeshiva students. We should not have, as if, I know it's an extreme idea, I'm just using it as a symbol, right? We don't want to separate between the Esavs and the Yaakovs. We don't want an Israeli army as if, Chat V'Shalom, I'm not saying it is, but Chat V'Shalom, we don't want an extreme model where there is a separation between those who fight and those who learn and those who are the voice of Yaakov. We wish, I believe, to have some kind of combination. We want the same Israeli soldier who protects and defends our country to also have the voice of Yaakov. So, if anything, I think today's shir is an argument why the Torah's way is to introduce into the Jewish army this new character, this third kind of person who brings together both the hands of Yaakov, the hands of Esav, and the voice of Yaakov. And if we are going to have the separation that people should sit in yeshiva, and they are going to be back like Yaakov Ishtam Yoshev Oalim. They're going to be a person who's going to just stay in the Bet Midrash and not leave the Bet Midrash as if. And we're going to leave the field as if, again, I'm saying as if, because I don't think it is, but as if in the extreme model to the people, the Asas of this world, then we're going to have a very, very serious problem. We have to somehow combine them and bring them together. Chazal tell us that David HaMelech, the great fighter, David HaMelech, was also the person who wrote Tehillim. And in the Tanakh, it says that one of the fighters of David was called Adino Ha'etzni. And Chazal teach us that this is not a fighter of David, but rather a nickname referring to King David himself. And the words of the Tanakh are Adino Ha'etzni. Adino sounds, the Gemara says, like Adin, gentle. And Etzni has the word Etz, wood. And the Gemara tells us that David HaMelech has both qualities in him. On one hand, he is strong as wood when he fights his enemy, but he is soft. He's Adin as a worm, the Gemara says, when he learns Torah and when he writes his poetry, when he writes his Tehillim. To have a personality that brings in both, that's very difficult. But surely that is the model that we strive to have in the Jewish community and the Jewish people. So I think that to sum up, I tried to explain today why I believe Yitzchak made a mistake thinking that both of the brothers have a place in the Jewish community. I tried to explain why, with all the dangers of Esav, Yitzchak chooses Esav because he feels and he realizes that we must stand up to our enemies. We cannot afford to be weak. We need people like Esav. And Yaakov at the time was not an alternative. However, throughout the book of Bereshit, emerges a new character, a third kind of model, not someone like Esav, not someone like Yaakov, but someone who has the hands of Esav and the voice of Yaakov. And throughout the book of Bereshit, Yaakov learns to be that person. And as I said before, I think that in the modern Israel today, that surely should be our model. That should be our model to combine both worlds together into one. That's our challenge. So today, to try to imitate that model of Hakol Kol Yaakov Vayadayim Yedei Esav. So I'm going to finish here. If there are any comments, questions, or anybody wants to say something, please feel free at this point to add something, to ask, or to comment. If you have something, just say it out, because I can't see if people are.
Yitzchak was blind, right?
What do you mean?
When Yaakov came to him, he really could not see in that moment, right?
Yeah, I imagine that the expression of not seeing probably also is more than just a physical problem of eyesight, but it probably is also a hint to his not really seeing the real Esav.
So you really meaning that was not a physical
No, I think he was.
handicap?
I think he was physical, but I think that it's more than just not physically seeing. I think the seeing here has a deeper meaning too. That's what I imagine. By the way, it's very clear that Rivka was told by God what to do, right? And not Yitzchak. Interesting, right? It's interesting that she was told and not Yitzchak.
You see that one thing we notice that communication between Rivka and Yitzchak was not the greatest.
Yes,
There was no communication.
Correct. Rav Hirsch, famously Rav Hirsch, in his commentary in Chumash, rebukes them for being not good parents, by the way. That's part of it. Yeah. Tov, I want to wish you all Shabbat Shalom. I'm going to be, B'ezrat Hashem, this Shabbat in Or Chaim. So if anyone, I never met people here really physically, but if you are in Shul for Shabbos, I appreciate if you come over and say hello. So introduce yourself if it's okay. Anyway, it was lovely to be here tonight. I wish you all Shabbat Shalom and Chodesh Tov.
Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really, really good. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very, very much. It was wonderful.